Hey, everybody. Welcome to Reigniting Small Business. I'm Laura Richards, COO of Spark Business Institute, and I'm here today with Patrick Lee to discuss the dreaded toxic boss. Hi, Patrick.
Hello, everybody.
So, Patrick, have you ever had a toxic boss?
That's kind of a loaded question. I mean, I think anybody who knows my background knows that I grew up in family business. And when I wasn't working in the family business, I was working for companies that were owned by friends of the family. And also, I'm not sure I'm allowed to answer that question exactly, but I think we probably all had a toxic boss at one time or another.
I think you're probably right. So let's identify the habits of a toxic boss, and then we'll weigh in with why this topic is important to small businesses and what we can do about it.
Sounds good to me. So let's take a look at maybe one of the first and most prominent indicators of a toxic boss. Or for those of you who are wondering, am I a toxic boss? You can start checking the little boxes here. But a toxic boss frequently will set completely unrealistic expectations for goals and performance. Right? They will put out there that we're going to accomplish this craziness over here, and it will frequently lead to folks realizing either right away or early on that's unattainable. We're never going to hit that, and that means that folks are demoralized. They're going to back away from striving for anything, and they're going to say, well, we're not going to hit that anyway. I'll settle into my pace, and that pace may not be what the organization really wants, right? And I would also say, you look at a good boss, right? A good boss will set the bar high, will set a stretch goal, but it's one that they know, okay, if we really do this well, that's actually within the realm of possibility. And that can get folks motivated to strive for it. Like, okay, we are close, or this is doable. Let's go.
Yeah, especially if they're supported along the way, which a good boss is going to build that in, we hope. Yeah, another thing that toxic bosses do often is they call all the shots. So everything comes out their way. And when things don't come out their way, they don't really know how to handle the problem without creating more problems, whether it's, infighting and dividing people or pitting people against one another. Toxic bosses often are only pleased with the outcome when it's the outcome they were seeking.
Yep. And that leads right into another one of those traits, which is that deflecting of responsibility and casting blame, right? That the buck doesn't stop here. The buck stops somewhere down there with all you riffraff, right? And if things aren't going real well, we're going to actually identify very specifically, oh, you're the riffraff that's causing all this trouble. Remember that ego piece that all entrepreneurs have. It can be difficult sometimes to recognize when my need to protect my ego is stopping me from exhibiting good leadership, right? Because a toxic boss protects themselves at all costs, whereas a good leader will often put their ego aside, admit when they make a mistake, own it, right? And sometimes being self-deprecating and admitting to prior mistakes as a way to say, hey, everybody, let's not worry about what just happened. I've made way worse mistakes before. Let's just move on from this. But we can learn from it. And we can also learn from a lot of the mistakes that I've made before. A good boss will offer that up because people are going to respect it. Okay, you're human, right? We see that you recognize what it's like down here in the trenches. We respect that.
Absolutely. And that creates trust. If you're willing to show me you make mistakes, I'm willing to make them too and tell you about them versus hiding them.
Yep.
So the other thing about toxic bosses is they just get their energy by wielding power over others. But the interesting thing is they may not be like that as parents, as spouses, and in their, regular everyday life. But when they get into the workplace, they become sneaky and manipulative, and they try and dominate other people. And really the bottom line goal is they just want to wield that power.
I think a lot of times those bosses don't come in with sort of a set of values or principles that it's more like, you know, I'm in business here, and that's a combination of making money at all costs, you know, making sure I look good at all costs, you know, moving up the ladder at all costs, whatever that might look like. And so those traits that make them good parents or spouses or citizens don't apply here, right? The rules are somehow different. And now I'm going to behave in this weird Machiavellian way that compromises everything.
Yeah. And the bummer about all that is that a lot of times they're turning down good ideas because of their need to dominate. So they're missing out on basically what you're paying your employees for, which is their initiative.
I don't even think they're listening. I mean, they're not. If you're in that mindset, all you're doing is watching your trajectory through the organization's movement. You're not paying attention to anything else going on. And you know, another aspect of that is that toxic bosses are quick to criticize people in front of their peers, right? To make, like, if I'm casting blame because somehow I need to cast blame, it's better if it's seen in public, right? Because that shows who's in charge, you know, harken back to some of the things we've been talking about here. But it also makes, I think, the toxic boss believes somehow that if I make an example every time something like this happens, it's unlikely to happen again, which is kind of not really what ends up working. I mean, what ends up working is that I'm criticizing people in front of other people. So now they're scared to poke their head up. They're scared to make any sort of mistake. And they're not necessarily even trusting of the people they work with, because if those people, you know, turned on them when they were called out, well, you know, I can't trust anybody here, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think it's ironic because on the one hand, they shame people in front of their peers. On the other hand, when true conflict arises that needs action in the business, they're often missing. So they're busy at crucial times and their input and direction isn't given. So the employees are left to do this without any input from the leader, because they're only interested in the good news. If it's not something that I want to hear, don't tell me. I'm not going to be around to hear it. So in that way, I think it leads right on to the next one, Patrick.
So toxic bosses hurt the morale and the productivity of employees. Okay. They just do. I mean, if you know that you're going to be getting the blame for stuff, if you know that your ideas are utterly not listened to, right? It's just a bad environment to expect some level of productivity. And what I would say here is this can be especially problematic for small businesses. I mean, we've been talking about this in a generic sense. I mean, within a corporation, within a government entity, an organization, nonprofit, whatever, and small business. But small business has less buffer, right? The leader is frequently the leader, you know, and employees don't have a lot of options where they go. And so there is an opportunity cost in this. You know, for a small business to make it to its lofty goals, everything has to hit right, you know? And one of the things we know is that if a team starts operating really well together, you know, it's the total is greater than the sum of the parts, right? Well, that requires that synergy. That requires everybody going in the same direction, striving for the same thing. That's that whole, like, okay, we're rolling along here all together. You know, in what we just described, if you have an environment and a culture that is what we just described, you know that's not happening, and you know folks aren't giving their best, and they're not all pulling in the same direction. In some instances, you may even have sabotage going on because people are bitter and they're not happy. So there's an opportunity cost there that is incredibly destructive for a small business.
Absolutely. And it makes sense. Obviously, if employees are suffering, the organization is going to suffer also. And the tone that's set at the top, you know, good or bad, it trickles down and it affects people's behavior, which then, you know, affects people's results.
Absolutely. And so to put some hard sort of numbers to this concept here, Jim Clifton, who is the CEO of the Gallup organization, found that 60% of employees working for the US federal government are miserable. Now, it's not because of low pay or poor workplace benefits or insufficient, vacation days or, any of these things that we would tend to guess at, right? It's because they have bad bosses, okay? And when I saw this stat, I laughed to myself because I have quite a few government clients, and one of the refrains that I hear a lot is, yeah, well, the workplace boss for this particular project is awful, just awful. But we work around them and we still manage to complete the mission, right? And so when I saw this, I said 60%, that seems kind of low. Listening to the people talk to me, it seems like it would be even higher. So, there's always a converse to all these things. If 60% are miserable, 40% aren't, right? So the opposite is also true in terms of results. If toxic bosses lead organizations to bad results, good bosses lead organizations to increased results, revenue, profits, morale, whatever you're judging by.
Yes. And better health apparently too, Patrick, because in a Swedish study, researchers found at the Stress Research Institute in Stockholm, when they studied 3,100 men over the course of 10 years, the men who reported having bosses they didn't respect were 60% more likely to suffer a heart attack or other life-threatening cardiac condition. And that was published in the Journal of Occupational Environmental Medicine. So my takeaway from this is that's a very dramatic example of death, and that's 60%. So the other ill health effects, whether they're mental health effects or just burnout and stress, could be a game ender and certainly a game changer for small business. Because as we've talked about, if you don't feel compelled toward your organization and your management and your team, you're not going to work at that level. And apparently you're not going to live as long either.
And I think, that's statistics about the people working for the toxic boss, right? But let's even turn that around to the toxic boss, right? So the toxic boss is in a toxic environment. It may be of their own creating. I mean, those of us who have done this have created situations we were not super happy with. But if you're in that level of an environment, it's having an impact on that boss too, because all those behaviors are becoming repetitive because they're doing it to try to satisfy something that's not being satisfied. And now the burnout, the opportunity for them to have health issues and so on also goes up. So it's not just being inflicted downward. The entire culture is having this happen, and it affects the bosses in this way too.
Yeah. You and I have talked a little bit about why people stay in those bad situations. But it's interesting because you see that toxic bosses create environments where people are angry, they're in despair, they're hopeless. And if the employees are feeling that way, they're really obviously not going to be motivated to do their best, like we talked about.
Yeah, I had a client that I think fit into this pretty well, and this client was fairly successful. I mean, they had a large company, and by large I mean they were doing upward close to $10 million of revenue, and they probably had I don't know, a little less than 100 employees, and there was success there, but it was really difficult to maintain that success and to maintain a upward movement, because this particular owner, being on stage was almost more important than anything else. So the employees would get incredibly frustrated because the concerns that they had, the concerns the client had, all those concerns would always come secondary to this particular owner's need to be on stage, be the one who solves everything, be the genius behind the whole thing, and so there was a lot of stuff that was just frustrating. Like some particular thing was working really well and it was just flowing along, but it hadn't been that boss's idea, right? Well, at some point that's got to come down, because if it wasn't the boss's idea, we can't succeed on somebody else's idea. We got to succeed on this boss's idea. So it would lead to things that were working getting scrapped for no reason. I mean, and this particular owner would put forward reasons, but everybody knew that doesn't make any sense. This is working, right? And so, that would go on and on. So there was high turnover, there was constant morale problems. There was lots of meetings that had no purpose other than this person occupying the stage. And so there was a level of intense frustration, which could lead to a level of turnover. Well, this particular owner had overcome a lot of these toxic behaviors as a boss. I think realizing early on that turnover wasn't good enough by overpaying, right? So you ask, why do people stay? In this instance, they were staying because literally their resumes weren't going to allow them to go somewhere else and make this kind of money. So now you have people who are feeling trapped, which is even almost worse, right? Because if you can exit a toxic environment, there's an answer for you. But if you feel permanently trapped in that toxic environment, that isn't doing you any favors as an owner and as an employee sitting there. It's only going to lead to worse and worse outcomes.
Well, and ultimately, a few employees did leave, right? Ultimately.
Well, ultimately, there were employees who left. There were just situations that required employees to leave, and they, almost to a person, they report that they had no idea how bad it had been for them until they were free of it. And then the proverbial, off your shoulders and like, oh my gosh, the world feels like a completely different place from this perspective. And it's interesting because, culture trumps individuals. We've talked about this before. So even folks who complain about environments may stay in that environment, but just because of, culture tends to conform people to it. Folks don't like change, which we talked about before. So you may not even know how mired you are in a situation that is not optimal until you're free of it and you look back. I mean, how often have any of us done that, where we've just kept doing something and then we realize when it's over, why did I allow that to continue as long as I did?
Yeah. And that leads exactly right into my next point, which is really no rewards program or benefits or anything can compensate for a toxic boss if you know the price you're paying. And sometimes you don't figure that out until you're gone, to your point, Patrick. In terms of, economics across the board, bad bosses end up costing their employers tens of millions of dollars a year in monetary damages and lawsuit settlements. So it's definitely something, from small business all the way up that we need to be aware of and address.
So there are quite a few studies out there that show a strong correlation between employee engagement, customer satisfaction, and therefore revenue trajectory, right? And so we picked one out here. There's one Harvard Business Review study from about 15 years ago. The authors identified the employee customer profit chain at Sears, okay? And in Sears' case, when employee satisfaction improved by just 5%, customer satisfaction improved by 1.3%, which led to a 0.05% improvement in revenue. Now, you may say, okay, that doesn't sound that significant. But for $50 billion Sears revenue, that came to an extra $250 million in sales revenue. And it's not so much the importance of that level of money one way or the other. It's the correlation between those three things, right? There's a direct correlation of employee satisfaction to customer satisfaction to improved revenue. So if you're looking, well, why would I do this? What good does it do? Well, it specifically does affect the things that you are supposedly in business to accomplish.
Yep. I think that's exactly right. So, is being a skilled boss something that we can learn, Patrick? And if so, what steps do we need to take to learn it?
So, this is that, this opens up a whole big can of worms, right? Because you have leadership versus management, and can leadership be taught? Can management be taught? If you don't have inherent skills, can you learn those skills, right? And I think most folks who are doing training and teaching and mentoring will put forward that most things can be learned. Okay. That being said, I think there are some skills and traits that folks naturally have or have an inherent ability to call forth. And I think we saw that one Gallup study on the state of the American manager found that only 1 in 10 people have the high talent to effectively manage others. Another 2 in 10 have functioning managerial talent. So best case scenario, 3 out of 10 are entering this field with some level of competency, with only maybe 1 out of 10 having that level that you think could become transcendent, right? So the identification of those folks, the training up of those folks, the opportunity of those folks, that puts a lot of focus on doing this well. So I think according to Gallup, the mix of traits that they were looking at that, helps, gives you what it takes to manage others effectively were, the ability to be a motivator, a certain level of assertiveness without threatening, ability to hold folks accountable along with being accountable yourself, ability to work relationships, strengthen them, nurture them, and the ability to make decisions, right? The ability to actually make decisions. So when you take those 5 things and you're saying, okay, at best, 3 out of 10 people have some level of that inherent, it's going to be a lot easier to identify them, mentor them, train them up than to take somebody who has none of that and try to put them in a management position. And I think a lot of problems we've seen over the years is that concept of seniority and the concept of, success in something like sales or technical means you move up the ladder to management, and you never had the skills for that, right? And so now you start taking it from the other side. People are saying 60% of bosses are bad, whatever. Well, 60, I don't know what percent, but some percent of those people in those positions probably should have never been put in those positions to begin with.
Well, and talk about business owners. Hello, we all kind of start out as technicians and we're good at this thing. So we decide to create a business out of it. And all of a sudden we're managers. Well, we might not have been good managers to have started out. And maybe if we knew how hard it was going to be, we might not have even started to do it. So how do you know if you're a good boss or a toxic boss? There is a quick and easy test to see where you fall if you're brave enough to ask yourself, do people want to work for you? And if you can't answer that with a resounding and honest yes, maybe you can work with someone to improve upon your leadership and management skill set.
Yeah, because like we set up in the beginning, we've all done 1 or 2 or a few of these before. So, we can point and say that toxic boss, but we've all done these mistakes. I mean, I remember mine, I had apparently no filter for saying in front of my staff negative things about folks I was working with, right? Whether it was a partner or whether it was a customer or whatever that I was just frustrated with, and I would say it out loud with staff around. Bad. So I don't think we should all be like, oh my gosh, am I toxic and do I need to be defensive? I think this is a salvo into, check yourself first before you start worrying about what else is going on here.
And I would say to that as well, it's never bad to sit down with your employees and talk to them about what their experience is, because it's opening a dialogue and getting that kind of feedback is always a great place to start and start listening.
Indeed.
So thanks everybody for tuning in today. We'll be back next week. And between now and then, take care.
Bye, everybody.